Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the hearing with regards to granting or not granting the lease for the Netzel in on Naipunawai. Welcome back, staff, and thank you very much again for your time, and those that are still listening in. Do my colleagues have any questions for staff for clarification?
Yes.
Yep, thank you.
I was going to say, my first question is, because parking's a big issue with some of the submitters, would the community fields behind the proposed building be encouraged for people to be parking in rather than maybe parking out in front of residents' properties?
That's the practice right now. So when large crowds have turned up for events, typically for events, parking has been accommodated on site in that open space. Obviously there's going to be some more formalised car parking developed, which was typically a lot more efficient in terms of how you use space. But the residual area, which is approximately 2 hectares, could be used for car parking, yes.
And could it be, when I say being encouraged, like because the build, I know people are parking there, but it will be a different group of people, and the building will be like visually in the way when you're entering, so they may, at least initially, not even realise those fields like are there maybe. So I'm talking about maybe signage or something to encourage it.
Sure, and I think you're really touching on the traffic management plan, and that's what I was alluding to before, that there really isn't a traffic management plan in place that looks at everyday operations, Monday through to Sunday, in what we might call a normal circumstance, through to events on Naipunawai, and then of course the major event on the Canterbury Agricultural Park that also utilises Naipunawai. The plan that I'm referring to will address all of those activities, and the specifics you're talking about will definitely be part of that. When I get a response from our transport colleagues, I will talk to them about what measures could be put in place to prevent parking on the adjacent streets. There's certainly some areas that could be yellow lined, but you've got to be mindful, of course, as I'm sure you're aware, that if you put yellow lines outside people's houses, that creates another problem. So, but we'll ensure that the traffic management plan doesn't just look at what happens inside the site. It can obviously explore the feeding into the site and the surrounding environment.
Cool. I've probably got other stuff I'd need to figure out.
Yeah.
Just continuing with the parking question, the land on the other side of Naipunawai near Wigram Road, has there been any thought or discussion about parking on that side of Naipunawai?
That site has been leased to the Canterbury Agricultural and Pastoral Association, so they effectively control that land. So if you're referring to utilisation of that land during the show, that's a matter for Kappa. We can't, by right, use that land without their permission in any other circumstance.
Could I just, could we bring the photo up which Jeff Bones supplied to us, just so we're all on the same page? Because you're, sorry to just, so could we have the other photo, just the next one please? So you're talking about the land where you just see the corner of the, just in the corner, which is it? No. Yeah, no, it's better with this one.
It's not showing on these aerial photographs, but...
Oh, here we go.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
It's right in the bottom left corner, that's a portion of it. It's approximately 10 hectares or so worth of land. So, yeah, it's approximately twice the size of the area of land that's talked about where the community fields are.
That the land I was thinking about is the land at the moment that's actually covered with car parks, obviously during a AMP show.
So that's the polo grounds.
Yes.
So they're sports fields in any other sense of the word,
Right.
and they're used for polo.
So, yeah, so there's no opportunity at all for that to become parking? No. For the Netzel?
In its current form, no, but we could look into it's a sports field, and sports fields are allocated annually. We can look into the seasonality of polo and whether or not there's opportunities to use that in the short term. Canterbury Agricultural Pastoral Association may have grazing rights over that land. So that's another thing we'd have to consider.
I'll add some commentary too. It's David Bailey here. That bottom left-hand part of the park was actually prepared by council when working with AMP over the water retention project to make it more suitable for parking. So there's already been investment and partnership by council to make that possible for them to use from an entry and an exit point of view.
So, David, are you just talking about the strip of land on the park side of the road, or this side? Both?
On the bottom left of that picture as you see it.
Yes. Okay, yep. Just with regards specifically to the MP show, at the top of this photo you've got the 2 rugby league fields and a bit of green space to the right, which aren't utilised. In the parking integrated traffic management and parking plan, is that looked at as...
They haven't been used to date, but we are going to include all available land for consideration for the traffic management plan.
So if they were integrated, and also in the next photo, sorry, can you go back, Sam? Yeah, so to the green space to the left of the athletics track,
Yep.
can that be utilised as well? If
That
that's
will be considered as well. That's the second athletics facility. So the Canterbury Agricultural Pastoral Association, they have a licence to occupy the entire site for the Friday of the show.
Yep.
So the demand is not usually there on the Wednesday and Thursday for the full volume of car parking.
Yeah.
The Friday is the key. So we'll explore all possibilities.
Right. And as you said earlier in at the opening presentation, is that the integrated traffic and parking plan is in association with AMP shows. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. So Jeff Bone from representing Kappa mentioned that we'd had an initial meeting with Council and Novo Group, the transport planners. When we understand the decision that may or may not be made here, we'll kick that work off.
Yep.
To also advise the capital investment requirements that I referred to.
And that integrated traffic management and parking plan is also going to cover the Monday to Friday type 9 to 5, which we haven't done so far, which is that great?
That's correct.
So it's encompassing the whole lot. Thank you very much.
Yep, understand completely if you can't answer this, but there's reference given to 5 to 6 other sites that were looked at before coming to this point. And are you able to give us some understanding about why those sites didn't work? Totally understand if that's a PX type.
My recollection was that Mr. Barry referred to 5 non-council sites that they looked at seriously. So no, they were private matters that Netzel looked at with the private landowners.
Right, so they weren't sites on the AMP grounds at all?
No, not to my knowledge.
Mark Beatson talked about, I just wanted to understand, he talked about ongoing operational responsibilities for the partners that are there at the moment. Can you just explain what that is?
So look, I can talk about the everyday operation of the park. So it operates as a park. We have staff on site, 3 or 4 staff on site, and they look after the day-to-day maintenance requirements. David will be able to probably explain a little bit more about what the trust were talking about in terms of their comment on operational matters.
So the way the place operates is that it is an asset that the council owns on behalf of the community, and so all the assets, the $54 million that has been spent on the site to create the park and the built above ground assets have come through investment from the council, the ratepayers, in excess of $40 million, and then philanthropic over $6 million, and the sports partners over $6 million. And the way that the agreements were set up was so that ongoing operations would be managed by council initially and on behalf of the community, and that the sports would contribute some money towards the basic operating cost of the space. In Christchurch, all green space is provided free of charge. Internal spaces tend to have a tractor charge, and so that there was the athletics track and the hockey and the changing facilities in this situation. All the sports partners contribute, and anyone else that uses the space contribute cost to that we manage on behalf of the sports. The funding and allocation agreements they talked about basically referred to providing them first rights of booking space and using those space, and then once that's determined, then other providers and other sports and recreation groups are free to use the space as well.
Yep. And what others?
Yeah.
I think going around is quite good.
Yeah, and look, welcome, Robert. I just want to clarify, we're only looking at the lease, and part of the lease, we've gone in the consultation process. So the placement of the venue, the actual building, we cannot talk about with regards to it can't shift because it's been placed there for the consultation, correct?
The Reserves Act provisions around notifying these proposals are such that the proposed lease that is notified and thrown out to public consultation is specified particularly. So if there was a proposal to shift the leased premises or the building to some other location, that would fall foul of that requirement and would require, in my view, starting the process again. So if you were proposing to recommend that the lease be in a different location, then we would need to notify that again and go through seeking public consultation on that alternative.
Thank you very much, Robert. So with that in mind, one of the concerns from a number of the submitters was the visual amenity being lost by the local residents. So on page 16 of the agenda, here we go, thank you very much, Sam. Can we ask staff to take that in mind and look at how we can, or how you can soften the visual amenity between this building and the residents?
We can certainly look at the landscape elements and consider what is possible. There's also the adjacent Esplanade Reserve that we can consider increasing or accelerating the revegetation program. So we can certainly explore opportunities.
So I'm presuming that having a buffer zone of greenery would also reduce any concern, or partly reduce any noise as well. Would that be safe?
I'm not a noise expert, but my understanding is vegetation is not a great noise buffer.
Okay.
I wouldn't assume that that's going to be the result.
Okay.
Visually, yes. But,
okay. Thank you. Cheers.
Okay, just keeping on with just thinking about other sites for the facility. In terms, could we go back to that picture where we looked at the car parking again, please? Yeah. So no, the one with the road on. Actually, the other one. It's one there. Yeah. So where the car. So were any of those sites that we're looking at now with the car parks on them? Were any of those investigated as an opportunity for the facility to go on, understanding that that's AMP Association land?
So you would have heard Mr. Bone referring to the 7 months of negotiations that they had with Netzel to put the facility on the Canterbury Agricultural Park, adjacent to the show arena. There was, when Netzel came to council and suggesting that they were had hit a roadblock with Canterbury Agricultural Pastoral Association, some very quick analysis was done on spatially where the facility might sit. The only parcel that wasn't going to inhibit an existing use was the community space that is zoned for community recreation, where the facility is now, where they're requesting the lease from.
Was there any investigation of changing that land status really to in terms of negotiating with the AMP Association as a possibility at all?
I'm not quite sure the specifics of your question, sorry.
Yeah. So my understanding of what you just said, Andrew, was that the use of the AMP have the use of this land because it's them and they're allowed to use it in the way that they'd like to. Has there been any negotiation with them from a council point of view to somehow transfer ownership to land to be used for the facility?
So just to be clear, council owns the entire site with the exception of the built sheds that are used by AMP for sales, the sale yard, so it's a fully owned public site. Canterbury Agricultural Pastoral Association, they have lease rights over the land for the purposes of the show for 1 month, and that's the agricultural park component, which is essentially, as you see on the screen now, to the left of the pond. That's the Canterbury Agricultural Park, give or take. Now, Punawai covers the rest of the site. They have the ability, they have rights to graze, and they have rights to exclusive use for 1 day, the Friday of the show. So your question was, have we tried to negotiate with Kappa to change any of the current rights? The answer is no. We didn't foresee a need to, because if the building is to go ahead, it will not impede the show's rights as they stand to have full access for the entire day of the Friday. In terms of the other lessees or other users, no, we didn't try to negotiate with Polo, for example, whether or not they wish to relinquish their use of the polo ground. I guess the matter on the table is that the land, whilst it was shown as the master plan as community sports fields, the land was zoned and planned for this type of use. It's a recreation reserve, and the Reserves Act allows this type of use in a recreation reserve.
The obvious question, or the next question, is there an opportunity, should we do that, to get some further information in terms of this decision making about the lease? I'm not sure what others think.
So if we were to, so I think Robert's pointed out that to move the facility,
yes, would be a whole new
consultation. It
yep.
will also, I suspect, require the applicant to relinquish their resource consent and go through another resource consenting process, right. Possibly. I think, as I was pointing out, the way the district plan sits at the moment, this yep. is where it should go.
Yes.
In terms of planning, and the Reserves Act, it's also compliant with the Reserves Act.
Right. I think that it's really good to understand those things in terms of, asking questions from residents' point of view, in terms of those are the sorts of things that they've been asking and wanting to understand. So it's good to actually have the opportunity to ask those questions and for people to actually hear the information. So thank you for that.
Melanie?
With the, you've kind of answered this already, but I just wanted to make sure that with those community fields as they are at the moment, both where the site's proposed and the adjacent fields, is that where it is? Well, what was the rationale for putting it in that particular location as opposed to, say, further west?
Within the same parcel of land, is
Yeah.
your question, yes. The simple rationale, I think one of the submitters touched on it. The services required, sewage, power, water, etc., all come in through Augustine. So it's a proximity thing. So that was the preferred site for Netzel from their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it could have gone anywhere within that space. It would have had cost implications, no doubt, the further away from the services. But that is the parcel of land, effectively. Whilst it's shown on the master plan as community fields, it's not a community field in a sports sense at the moment. It's effectively a fairly rough paddock. That was a future use, yeah. So to minimise cost, I suspect, is why that site was chosen.
So was it... Netzel wouldn't have just chosen that site on their own because they would have done that in conjunction with council. So, there must have been from a resident's point of view, possibly, and I don't know because I didn't ask, but it would, if they want to have it further away from where the residents are, then it would seem further west along that area would be a better location. So, do you have a comment on whether that would be the case or not?
Yep, so as council staff were involved when the site was first investigated and essentially pointing out to Netzel that that particular parcel of Ngāpunawai, the rules, etc., were pointed out. And yes, I think it's been made quite clear now that technically it can go somewhere else, but the consultation, we would have to start this process, abandon this process, and start another process. And go through this process again, re-notifying where that building would sit. But it can, that may require modification to some elements of the resource consent. But that's for the resource consent team to consider. So effectively, this is a yes or no for the application as received. Yep.
Okay. One of the applicants mentioned about in the plan, McMahon and Haytons Road were also mentioned as entrances into Ngāpunawai, and they're not used currently. Will they be part of the future planning to take pressure off Augustine?
So, as I've mentioned with the upcoming traffic management planning process, everything will be looked at. There is mention of McMahon Drive in particular in the current management plan, and it talks about limited vehicle access through that future residential development. So it's now developed, but that was at the time that the plan was written. Is primarily for, but not limited to, emergency vehicle, pedestrian and cycle access during the year. Possible entry and exit for livestock vehicles only during major equestrian events in the park during the year, and a general vehicle exit during the AMP show. So that traffic management planning exercise will need to consider the management plan in its full, and point out the constraints and risks associated to that entrance, Wigram Road, and I always forget the name of the main road into AMP, but Curlitz, thank you. But there seems to be a consensus from the local residents that Wigram Road is the most appropriate, but they will all get looked at.
Anything further? No?
This hasn't been talked about much, but just about the lighting. So lighting is going in on the outside of the building for the car park, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. The car parks would require lighting.
So will that will obviously be on, well, not obviously, but will it be on the northern side of the building where the car parking is? Can we put the
More
map
on the
up?
western side, if you like, in the, do we have one of the least footprint image? Probably points it out the best. So the car parking, it's not very obvious in that that image, but it's primarily at the front of the building.
Yeah.
I believe I have seen in somewhere in the report, some of the other images have some car parking down the left-hand side of the building and a little bit on the right-hand side. But it's mostly on the interior. So the building is between the car park and the residence. Above the label, proposed netball, please. So the lighting in the car park would be directional LED lighting.
And would it be like movement sensitive, as in it will be off when there's no cars moving around, or would it be?
Well, that's a very technical question and a design question, I guess, but there's no reason why they couldn't be potentially motion activated.
Yeah.
And I think I read somewhere in the in one of the reports that the applicant is very aware of light pollution risk and aiming, if it goes ahead, to have downward facing lights, etc. Lighting is obviously quite a key consideration for residents because of mostly, I suspect, because of the existing flood lighting associated to primarily hockey and rugby league, perhaps. So there's the building, as has been pointed out, is a relatively straightforward building, mostly clad, very few windows, and the windows that are there are again facing the west or the top of the building, so you won't get light spill from the building as such.
I'm just following on from that. And again, it's a technical question for a design, but we've got a number of venues that have lights on an automatic timer, which the residents have asked for. So that's not uncommon, is it?
No, that's the norm for community field flood lighting. Yep. Absolutely. And we can program those lights so that they just switch themselves off.
Yep. So that's, and also with the technology we've got now, the LED lights, which are very directional, you can kind of mitigate again overflow, because the floodlights for a playing field are very different to, say, managing the overspill from a car park. Would that be true?
Yeah, that would be true. I mean, the floodlights are a lot taller as well.
Thank you.
Lots of questions. The construction of the facility, if it were to go ahead, when Napunawai was being developed, as David will know, there was, a lot of work was done with residents to minimise dust and all the rest of it. How possible is it for the construction vehicles to come from Wigram Road? There isn't a lot of space along the side of the track there to get into that ground. Would there be an opportunity for a temporary type road to be put for trucks to go through?
If you go back to Jeff Bones' image, you can see, the previous, you can see from there's an underpass under the motorway, and there is a gravel road that runs right past the polo ground down to this side of the athletics track. Then you can turn right, and that road is formed all the way through to the car park that has been built. So the roading infrastructure is already in place from multiple entrances. Yeah. So should it proceed, the company who's building the facility will need to present their traffic management plan that will have to be signed off and agreed. There is a restriction on the height of vehicles that can go under that underpass, and I think that's possibly why McMahon was used during construction for some of the larger vehicles. This is a relatively lightweight building, so I think once the earthworks are done, if it is proceeding, there won't be a lot of large movements. Obviously steel beams and the like, but yeah.
I'd just echo Andrew's comment there that the scale of the nature of this building, if it progresses, is significantly smaller than what occurred for the construction of Ngapunawai. Ngapunawai moved something like 2 million cubic metres of gravel from creating those holes onto the site. This approach is simply scraping a site, putting a car park down and building a building, so the level of movement is significantly less.
I guess following on from what Anne was asking, in the sense that, you know, we're very limited to what we can recommend to staff with regards to this process, but we can actually ask for certain things to be taken into consideration. That would be a fair sum up of what we are able to do. So
Yes, I think it's reasonable if a lease is granted to, I'm sort of looking at Russell, who's more our lease expert, and to ensure that in the agreement for the development that certain conditions are taken into account. Does that sound reasonable, Russell? Is that something we've done in a new build situation?
So you are referring to the construction of the building?
Well, there may be a number of things that we ask to be taken into consideration moving forward, whether if we grant or not, and if we don't grant, then obviously they're out the window. But if we do grant, there have been a number of concerns from the submitters and those who did not want to be heard. So we've read them all, and so, you know, we would, if my colleagues agree, and we do go forward with this, that if we just make some comment with regards to put into consideration when you say looking at the traffic management integration plan, that type of thing, that it may be other things as well that my colleagues come up with. So it's obviously they're not binding because we do not have that ability, but it's certainly to give a heads up, taking into consideration the concerns of those submitters, and so you've got a heads up, if you like, of our concerns, and we'd like to take for that to be considered when discussions abound.
Yes, I think that so that they have a land use resource consent has been issued, and that covers the construction of the actual site, which did raise conditions on which did look at the traffic, as you know, and looked at lights and those type of things. So they already have that. They didn't mention, so the construction of the building would have to abide by the district plan rules with regards to noise and that sort of construction details as well. The lease of the building is, the lease of the site, the ground lease, is really looking at the long-term ongoing conditions that you want the leasee to abide by, and they tend to be, so therefore any advice notes that you may want to put, you wouldn't normally put them into the lease document, but certainly the hearings panel could make a recommendation to council that the future leasee needs to consider certain points. So maybe through the council report system rather than actually on the lease document, considering that will be continuing on once the building actually is built. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so. Technically, we could look at this in a two phase. One is whether to grant the lease or not. But if we do grant the lease, then we can. Is it then possible to talk with staff, as we have with regards to looking at, say, the planting and mitigating the visual, but through the construction period, you know, we've had writing for the disabled not wanting construction vehicles through the AMP site, that type of thing. Can we give a heads up with regards to the construction phase that we would prefer the construction vehicles coming in from Wigram Road when able to, because obviously there will be vehicles that would be unable to come through that as in size.
Sure thoughts, Robert?
It would be unusual for matters that are normally considered through resource consent and building consent conditions to appear in a lease document.
Yes.
Albeit that the lease would need to be in place for them to build the building, and there'll be a period of time where there is no building. But I think the message that's being heard is that the panel would like to have careful consideration of the impacts of any construction on the neighbouring, surrounding residential and existing occupants of Ngāpunawai and the Canterbury Agricultural Park. So there are options there. As I've pointed out, there are some restrictions on the obvious one there is Wigram Road. There are some restrictions, but we can certainly take the points that you're raising into consideration and discuss those with Netzel, should it proceed, on how they approach their quality plan for their contract with their contractor. That's probably the best location for these
Thank you very much.
points.
Yep, thank
We
you.
could also, they will have to apply for a building consent. So we could talk to the building consent people as well about any concerns that you may have.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Regarding the, Ngāpunawai is the collaborative partnership between the council and the different sports entities that are there. So could we, I'm not quite clear, but is it intended that Netzel will become part of that collaborative partnership?
So I'll hand over to David, but essentially, I'll just hand it over to David. He's closest to the.
I understand that Netzel, the proponents, are keen to enter into an agreement that has them working together sensibly and particularly around pragmatic matters of car parking and flows and opportunities for them to do creative things together. I understand their intent to do so, and that they've approached the current Ngāpunawai partners to just start those discussions, and I would hope that those discussions would continue, and that certainly would then fall in line with the approach that currently exists, where the sports work together and they work to a set of principles and they collaborate in what they endeavour to do so. Sometimes it's not as constructive as it could be, but the intent is there.
Robert may wish to comment. I don't think there's any sort of legal obligation for them to join into that partnership. There was mention by the trust of a contract, and that the contract needs to be honoured. My understanding is it's more of an agreement rather than a contract. But David, do you want to comment on the document itself?
When Ngāpunawai came to being, there was a whole layer of agreements that were talked about, how rather than the sports acting unilaterally and individually, that there was a lot of value in them actually working together, both from a construction point of view and from an operational, and what it would mean for the communities and the activation of the sport, and that people could end up playing a variety of sports rather than one sport. And so my understanding from listening to some of the submitters is their intent is they would like to try and preserve that approach. And it went through a layer where the first layer was a funding and allocation agreement, and which enshrined, hey, we'll invest this and we will ask for these rights. And then we went further into the statement of management access and principles and practices, which talked around how they would behave together. And then we actually had a behavioural and values-based document as well. And my listening to the submitters and listening to the proponents is the idea is to try and have them to be part of that approach.
So even if these agreements are not necessarily legally binding, have the groups literally had a signature put to a piece of paper?
Yeah.
So could we ask as part of the lease that we ask that Netzel signs as well?
I certainly heard from Netzel in their presentations that they're willing to do that. Just for clarity, I guess there is a distinct difference in the approach at the moment.
Yeah.
Netzel are self-funding,
Yeah.
and so this is our normal approach that council would take: self-funding, grant a lease. The other parties we're financial contributors,
Yeah.
but my understanding is council owns all the assets. So they're council assets, so they don't have a lease.
Yeah.
So that is the key difference. What we're talking about is an overarching partnership between occupants on the site.
Yeah.
And I certainly heard that Netzel were clearly inclined to want to join in, so to speak. I don't think we can legally, or could we make it a condition of the lease? It would have to be conditional on both parties though,
It
not
would.
just Netzel.
It would need to be a aspirational type of statement, because multiple parties would need to agree together to engage in a particular mode of behaviour. So any statement would need to be aspirational, and it could go in the lease.
So could we word that a lot? Sorry, to word that along the lines of something that, if we granted the lease, that it would be our hope that they would join. Is the agreement known as the SMAC? Is that what we?
It would need to be a variation of recognising that some parties would own an asset and other parties pay higher fees to use an asset. So it would be a variation of that, and so then it would be to enter into continue negotiations, discussions to come up with a code of behaviour and a code of practice, and some principles that enshrine how they will plan and operate together in the future, which is what currently exists.
And I mean that would be a detail, obviously, that we can't plan today. But I mean, as Robert, as you said, it can be aspirational from the panel. Is that correct?
Yes, I think you'd use
That would
words
be-
like you would ask them to engage constructively and positively with the other partners at Ngāpunawai to produce certain outcomes.
I think we rely on you to do the wording, as it's,
There are two bits that
if it were.
help us in particular in here, and that the council is particularly keen on partnerships and has that as part of our strategic approach, and certainly was the underpinning approach that we took within Ngāpunawai to reasonable effect. And then recently, with the government's announcement of the $265 million that they're investing into supporting the development of play, active recreation and sport over the next 4 years, they also have enshrined in there the importance and fundamental consideration that it won't be about individual sports, it will be about people collaborating together and organisations collaborating together to enable more people to be able to be actively participating. And so it follows that line of council interest, it follows that line of government interest, and I understand Netzel are very keen to sort of be part of that approach as well.
Thank you. Mel? I guess just going back to traffic movement in the big picture, do we work in with any discussions with ECAN with regards to kind of buses coming to Ngāpunawai, because it is a sporting hub, so when there are special events, do we as a council link in with Environment Canterbury, because they own, or not, they dictate the bus routes and how you can manage with the buses, so do we to try and mitigate traffic overall?
We can certainly do our best. As you say, they call the shots in terms of routes. But I would like to think that if we put a comprehensive case together in a comprehensive traffic management plan, that they will look on that positively. It would certainly alleviate some of the concerns that some people have about the ability for kids to travel to and from. And certainly in discussions with Kappa, they have shown an interest in, ideally having buses on a regular route, that if that could be incorporated and heavily utilised during the show, obviously that would be a huge benefit as well.
Thank you very much.
Just talking more about traffic, Andrew, you were talking about a bid for the annual plan to get Wigram Road entranceway open and fit for purpose. Any idea, how would that fit into the timeline in terms of the development and the use of this? Any thoughts?
It can be incorporated very closely to the Netzel construction timeline. So my understanding is that if they are able to proceed. Their intent is to try to open the facility prior to Christmas 2021. The first year of our new long-term plan would be financial year 21-22. We could try and incorporate it, if it's a successful bid, into quite a close time frame to the facility opening and lessen the impacts. We'll certainly be doing our best to explore the existing long-term plan to see if there's any way that we can expedite this. I should mention too that the intent and the costings that have been done include linking the cycleway from Wigram Road through the site. I failed to mention that earlier, sorry.
Thank you. Well, thank you. We're just